Hi, it's Rob from the Bush and Boltgun. Today I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to paint Necron Scarabs. I really like the new Scarabs that come from the Indomitus box, so I'm going to be painting up them first, and I'm going to be painting up a little stand of the old ones afterwards. So this is the effect that we're going to be going for on the Scarabs. See the newer ones on the left and the older ones on the right. The first colour that we're going to use is Citadel Black Templar Contrast. Now use this instead of just using black, as it's easier to spread onto the areas that are going to be black here. It does give them a slight highlight, and then when you're applying the actual paint highlights later on, they'll just be sort of highlighting the areas that are already highlighted but giving it that look that it's painted. This is just because there's going to be a lot of Scarabs in the force and a lot of Necrons, Necron warriors and things like that. I've been using the Black Templar rather than using black paint. It is just easier to get on there, get a decent layer on it and get a decent coat. So once you've painted up the legs, the little bits between the armour and that, we're going to move on to Citadel Runelord Brass, and this is going to be to paint each of the little legs, like the blade parts at the end of them, and the carapace on the back of the Scarabs. Once we've finished with that, we're going to be going on to Citadel Cryptek Armourshade, which is the newest Games Workshop shade. It's a really cool colour. Gives them a nice gloss, kind of mottled look when it's finished. Looks really good when you paint it over the Runelord Brass. Also, it's quite a distinctive colour once it's all been painted up as well, so it really does tie the armour together for all of the Necrons. When you paint up the older versions and put them next to these as well, painted up in the same colours, they do look really good. It does sort of blend them in together, so they're not quite as noticeable. So now we're going back to Runelord Brass. We're mainly painting the top surfaces of the legs and the carapace at the back there. You don't want to be painting the whole thing, you want to leave some of that shade visible in the gaps, in the little dents and scuffs, and also around the bottom edge of the carapace too. Once you've got the carapace and that painted with the Runelord Brass, it's on to the next colour. Now we're going to be using a little bit of Citadel Canoptek alloy. I'm going to use this to highlight the area that we've just put the Runelord Brass back on. Now as we're highlighting it, you want to think about where the light's going to be catching it, so on the top surfaces again you want to try and leave as much of the Runelord Brass and the shade in place as possible. Just highlight the top part of the Runelord Brass and the areas that catch the most light. So where you've got those legs that are slightly more vertical, you just have a bit of this at the very top of them. When the legs are a bit more horizontal, you'd have it going further down. With that done, we're just going to use a little bit of Citadel Model Air Chrome mixed in with the Canoptek alloy to give it a nice lighter highlight. And we're just going to do the very edges and underneath some of the details like the dents and the bullet holes in them, just to give them the highlight on the underside of those ridges to make them stand out better. Next up, we're going to use some Vallejo White. You can use this just to paint up all these little domes in the middle of the body, and also the kind of eye at the front of the Scarabs as well. Just want to give this a nice smooth coating. If you want to, you could do a little bit of grey beforehand and then just do the white on sort of the top, maybe 2/3, to give that a slightly darker bit when you come to put the glow on. But I'm just doing this as white and then putting a bit of extra Tesseract glow around it to give the effect that it is glowing over the black. So next up, we're going to be highlighting the black. We're going to be using some Vallejo German grey. You just want to pick out the details here. Like so. Now we're going to use some Citadel Mechanicus standard grey. This is just going to be to do some little tiny highlights on the areas that we've just highlighted with the German grey. Now this is a very quick highlight over the top of these, just to bring out some of those little details, make them stand out that little bit more. Like so. And finally, we're going to be using some Citadel Tesseract Glow. You're just going to be putting this onto the areas that you painted white earlier, and also the area around it, so the edge of the carapace. You want a little bit over the black and the grey areas surrounding it, just to give the effect that that is glowing in the middle. If you do put a little bit too much on there, you can wipe it off with your thumb if you're very quick. But don't wipe too hard because you can take the paint off too. And with that, that is the finished Scarabs. I'm going to move on to the older versions now, so if you're just painting new ones, don't worry about them too much. If you want to see how the old ones are painted up in the same style, then that's going to follow on from this now. So again, we're going to start with the Citadel Black Templar Contrast. You're going to paint this over the legs, over the sections of the back. On these you can see a little bit more of the sides and the underside, so you want to get the Black Templar under there as well. And once you've got that finished, we can move on to the next colour. So the next one is going to be Citadel Runelord Brass, exactly the same as what we did before. This follows exactly the same pattern that we did before, the paint, the same order. Just look ever so slightly different, obviously different legs, look a little bit more blocky, not quite as high tech and terrifying. But that's not a problem, because when you paint them up in the same style, it brings them together, and so you can have them side by side. They look very different, but they all look uniform, which is kind of what I was going for with them, so they all kind of blend in together. Now we have the Cryptek Armourshade shade from Citadel. You apply this to all of the Runelord brass to give it that mottled look. Again, it is a very, very cool shade, this. I do like this. Like so. Next we're going for Citadel Runelord brass and reapplying this colour over the Armourshade. So again, you want to be keeping this to the top surfaces, having it trail off and getting a bit thinner towards the bottom, so that you've still got areas of the Cryptek Armourshade showing through. Now we're going to be using some Citadel Canoptek alloy. Again, this is to highlight the areas that you just put the Runelord brass on, so think about where the light's going to catch them, and you want to be painting it here. When I'm painting these, I'm leaving the metallics not smooth, so you can see some of the shade underneath them. It isn't a completely smooth finish to them, so you can see that discoloration, you can see the previous layers below them. That just gives them that look of being a bit battered and worn, rather than being brand new. They've been sat off for a few 100,000 years or millions of years or what have you. Now going on to Vallejo White. I'm going to paint the eye at the front here, and then just to make them that little bit different and give them a bit more of a glow, we're going to paint the little line behind the eye as well on the back. We're also going to paint that rod that sticks out like a little tail. You should see that on the next video, these little lines here being painted. Now we're going to use some Vallejo German Grey to paint the darker areas again. So as we did before, you want to look at where the area will be catching the light and highlighting those areas. Like so. Next up, it's the Citadel Mechanicus Standard Grey. We're going to just do the highlights on the legs and on the black areas of this, just to make those edges stand out where they're catching the light. And finally, we're going to add the Citadel Tesseract Glow to all the areas that we painted white, and then just a thin little bit on the areas around that, just to give them the impression that they're glowing. So here I'm just putting on the initial coat of Tesseract Glow onto the areas, and now we're going to start adding some of the glow to the edges around those illuminated parts. Like so. And that is the finished Scarabs. Really happy with how they turned out. You can see the colours of them, despite them looking very different from the new Scarabs, the colours of them do blend them in quite well. I'm happy with how they've turned out. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you have, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. Also, think about subscribing to some of our other social media linked below. Thanks very much.